in the district representation, some voting representation 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 in the district
Welcome, welcome, welcome to this edition of Messy Conversations. Good to see everyone on an early May afternoon, at least here in Los Angeles. Today we'll be talking about voter rights with Clarence Williams, who you all know well at this point, who's currently describing himself as Southern fried from head to toe. And Clarence is just an extraordinary wealth of information and experiential knowledge that's hard to match. He has brought in to be in conversation with us Professor Sonia Jarvis.
You're ready for me to start?
David, you muted yourself in the middle of that.
Oh, well, you missed all the best part. Or someone, I think somebody muted me. I think that's more likely. But joining Clarence will be Sonia Jarvis, who's an attorney and legal scholar and teaches at Baruch College. Her practice focuses on civil rights, civil liberties, voting rights, and so on. We're extraordinarily lucky to have Sonia joining Clarence in today's conversation. A couple of quick announcements. Next week's Messy Conversation is going to focus on BSU. And so we welcome you all back for that. As always, we encourage you to use the chat function during the Messy Conversation. Any questions or comments that you want to make. After Clarence and Dr. Jarvis have spoken for a while, then we will be mining the chat for your for your questions and comments and inviting you to bring them into a larger conversation. So please make use of that. And I'm going to get out of the way and hand things over to Clarence.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Roosevelt, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stennis. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. That then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September, 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That
I told that Negro woman next time she comes down here, she better bring that $1.70 to pay that poll tax. I had her guess how many jelly beans was in the jar. And then I had her repeat the preamble of the Constitution. She knew it, but I had to do it backwards too. We just got all them Negroes on up out of here talking about registering to vote.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Voter Rights Issues of Messy Conversation. I'm Clarence Williams, and joining me today, as you've heard from David Tripp, is the incomparable Professor Sonia Jarvis. Professor Jarvis is a visiting professor to several universities, but she is on the campus of Baruch College. She is many times appearing at Rutgers, at George Washington University, at Georgetown University, at Harvard University, and of course, her beloved Yale. I recently found out a hardcore fact about Dr. Jarvis, which I'm going to share. It is not in her CV or in her bio, but recently she was featured on ESPN as a historical, she's laughing, as a historical, lauded, first ever Black girls basketball coach, which she did not know she was a first until recently. But the reason Dr. Jarvis is joining us is to shed light on voter rights issues. She herself has been a law clerk for some of the most prominent judges in America, and she has served the efforts of so many different organizations, including the Black Women's Agenda, which she was president of. She has been involved in the President's Initiative on Race of the White House. She has been a consultant to the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. And she has, been involved with the organization that I knew her from, which is the National Coalition of Black Voter Participation. I can go on and on and on about her storied career, but you guys can go into the LibGuide and get all of that so we can go on with our hearty discussion. And what I've become used to in this space is to always bring a little bit of context to our conversation. And for today's purposes, we're going to kind of like look at voter rights around the culture of BIPOC people, because it seems that those are the people who, for whatever the reason, America does not want to vote. And then so to look at our context of today. And Dr. Jarvis, you can nudge me on this, but in 1799, there was a group of Black Philadelphians who decided to challenge this notion of unalienable rights and liberties for people that look like me, for the enslaved or the free people who were descendants of the enslaved. And it prompted a big thought because folk did not feel that that piece of paper called the Constitution included those people. So here they were questioning the citizenship of Black people in America and being told before shipped off to war that they were fighting for liberty, justice, and democracy. And they were not enjoying that on the land of this United States experiment. That's the little prelude to an opening of a thought, because if voting is going to be a sacred right laid down by the Constitution, then the Indians don't have it, the Native people don't have it, and the Black people don't have it, and no woman of any persuasion has it. So how did this path to voting come about?
Wow, that was a nice lead in, Clarence. Thank you. I thank the entire panel and those of you who have joined this discussion. I tend to run on, so you'll have to rein me in when we get close to our end. But let me start. My first attempt to answer your question is to remind all of us that yesterday, Sunday, was Law Day. And the purpose of Law Day was to make sure people could do some basic things like participate in our democratic process. And so it's May 1st. It was first recognized by President Eisenhower and has been celebrated, at least in legal circles since then. But it's also important for us to think about what does it mean that from the very beginning of this nation, we have had fights over voting, okay? And let me give you a sense of that in a number of different ways. So for starters, the preamble to our Constitution reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Okay? That's how we started our government, with that language. But we almost didn't have a constitution because there was a major disagreement over what? Who gets to vote, over representation. So that was one of our first political fights as a nation. And because it was political, as many of you know, we try and resolve political disputes through compromise. Well, unfortunately, the compromise affected certain groups more directly than others. So, for example, that issue of representation, when it came to Native people, those who were here before the colonists came from other places, they were not allowed to vote because they were not recognized as being part of this new nation. And it took until 1924 that American Indians could exercise the vote. Now, if you talk to representatives from that part of our national face, they'll tell you, even though that law changed, it took until the voting rights that they were able to actually enjoy those rights. And the Voting Rights Act wasn't passed until 1965, okay? So again, the original folks here were written out. And then there was a concern about, wait a second, what do we do with those people we dragged here on ships against their will? Well, we need their votes. We need their representation, but we don't want to give them the right to vote. And so we're going to call them 3/5 of all other persons, just so that those who purchased humans for their labor could have more representation. And it's reflected in the first part of our history that 12 out of 14 of our first presidents were slave holders. And it starts to show why it was so hard from the very beginning to establish this. We can also look at one of our first laws, which was a statute of 1790, which talked about the voting process, who gets to vote. You had to be white, you had to be male, you had to own property. Those were requirements. If you didn't have any of those, you could not vote. Now, to go back to one point you made, Clarence, there were actually 2 states that did allow women to vote, but then they were chastised and eventually went the other way to join all the other new states that would not allow females to exercise the right to vote. And it wasn't until Wyoming was added to this nation that women were able to vote on their own behalf. All right, so we've got that going on, and then we have the issue of people who came after the founding of the nation and the adoption of the Constitution. And the question became, how could they participate in the process? Would they be allowed to or not? And that, again, was a function of point of entry, as well as what were the attitudes on behalf of those who were now considered citizens versus the newcomers. And to this day, we continue to have fights over immigration. That's going to be a big issue in the upcoming fall elections. I'm willing to predict. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's going to be continue to be an issue of division, whether as opposed to an issue of unity. Okay, so if we're thinking through why this is so, and this is still just to this point of who gets to vote and who doesn't, it's all about power. And we see now the power of the vote, given the election system, the election process we went through during the 2020 election cycle. Okay, let's think about that for a minute. And it was the highest level in nearly 100 years. So people showed up in the midst of the worst pandemic since the last one 100 years ago and cast their ballots and were able to do so because states had to adopt more reasonable approaches to allow everyone to participate, given the deadliness of this pandemic. And so there were only a handful of states that prior to the pandemic would allow some of these more, these easier voting processes, relaxing the rules around absentee ballots, for example, allowing early voting. I mean, these were things that states played around with over time, but it was that critical mass of the pandemic and a major election cycle that led, I would argue, to these greater numbers. But then something happened on the way to the party of who would be the next president. And I don't say that jokingly. Something very serious happened. And I would argue that we are still in the midst of what happened on January 6th, 2021, where there was an attempted insurrection to change the election results for the presidency. We're still waiting for the final report from Congress on how that happened and who were the actors involved in that. But regardless of what the House committee does on this, we know that our democracy is much more fragile than we may have anticipated. So I'll stop there. Sure.
I'm just going to press back. Since you've brought us into the 21st century, can you go to 2013? Some light on Shelby County versus Holder, which was a major assault to voting rights?
I will be happy to talk about Shelby. But in order to make sense of Shelby, we have to understand how the Voting Rights Act came to be passed.
Thank you. Thank you.
I had the great honor and privilege of clerking for Judge Frank Johnson of Alabama, who was part of the Fifth Circuit at that time. And he made some of the first rulings indicating that the voting process in states like Mississippi and Alabama and Texas and Georgia weren't necessarily, I'm sorry, he was talking just about Alabama, but his ruling on cases of access to the ballot were upheld by the Fifth Circuit and then ultimately by the Supreme Court. At that time, the Chief Justice was Chief Justice Warren. And so with respect to those initial cases, it was all about why is this city or county or state taking such actions to prevent these individuals from voting? And my short answer to that is because they had been doing it since the end of the Civil War and were trying to continue to do that. And now finally you had federal judges saying, wait a minute, you're depriving citizens of their right to vote. And you had a Supreme Court that agreed. And out of that mix, we had the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to now state what are the parameters and what could states do to either assist voters or make it more difficult. Part of that process involved requiring the act to be renewed. Initially, it was for every 7 years, then it was 10 years, then it was 25 years. The most recent time that we reauthorized the Voting Rights Act was in 2006. 98 out of 100 senators voted to approve that reauthorization. But in 2013, Chief Justice John Roberts decided that he really didn't like, he's never liked the Voting Rights Act. Let me just say that. His record showed that. But he decided to go after the most important section of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, in this decision, where you had a county that did not want to have to be subject to the Section 5 pre-clearance requirement. This pre-clearance requirement said if something happens prior to an election that adversely affects especially a minority group, then that group has the right to go to the Department of Justice and seek assistance in changing those adverse actions. Well, Shelby County basically said, America has changed. We don't need to be concerned about this. We have a black president. Therefore, we really don't need to pick out and pick on various states that have been under this shadow for decades. It's time to move past that. Well, if the court in Shelby had said, we find it unconstitutional, the preclearance requirement in Section 5, that would have been one thing. It would have been very hard to overturn that. And in fact, the only way to overturn that would be through a constitutional amendment. But he did it on statutory grounds. He said, we don't think the formula works. It hasn't been updated. And Congress, if you want to come back with something else, fine. But until you do, we are going to stop using Section 5. And then the second shoe dropped in right after the last election in June of 2021, when the court again took aim at Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which was not about preclearance, but allowed those who had been adversely affected by discriminatory voting practices to still file suit. And that section of the Voting Rights Act was also limited. So against that backdrop, some of you may now understand why there was so much attention over, can we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, for example?
So HR1?
Excuse me?
Is that HR1?
There were three altogether, but this was the one that was to actually deal with Shelby County. That's why I was making that distinction, right?
Sure.
HR1 was trying to deal with the entire issue as opposed to just what had happened in Section 5. And that did not happen for a number of political reasons that we can talk about later. But does that help at all to start to answer your question?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so now we're in this very strange space with an attempted insurrection, with a crippled Voting Rights Act. At the same time, we had the highest level of participation in almost 100 years. And now we're seeing, following the November 2020 elections, 49 states made changes to their voting laws, and most of those changes were negative. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we go forward as well. So one of the points I want to make sure that I'm sharing with this group and that we can have further dialogue about is that our system depends on the vote to determine who runs the federal government, who's the president, as well as how are we represented by members of the House and members of the Senate. And beyond that, what happens if the Supreme Court makes an adverse decision that's affecting voting rights, but especially minority voting rights? What are the alternatives and what are the strategies that can be used to deal with that against the backdrop of attempts to rig the whole confirmation process, if you will, the Supreme Court confirmation process? Our pattern has been to allow presidents to appoint members. The current number of the court is 9, but it's been slightly higher and it's also been slightly lower over time. And I don't think we're going to see it expanded anytime soon. Okay, so what does that mean going forward, and how do we organize around that? How do we come up with strategies to encourage especially young people to engage in the voting process? That's why anytime I have a chance to talk to a college audience or a high school, I will do so, because that's the future. If we can't convince them to get involved in the process, we're not going to make the kind of progress that we had been making. My parents were... Go ahead.
Sound
Clarence.
like a total brat for a moment.
Okay, you can.
Because this is a messy room, a messy conversation.
I love the title of this, by the way.
Help this 17-year-old out right here and just explain to me, why is it necessary for a country to take a basic right away from its citizens? Why now do states have so much power that when I go to my home state of North Carolina, you may need 2 pieces of ID. You can no longer do early voting in certain counties. You have to be able to walk well, because so disabled people, are in trouble.
Yes.
And students who happen to fall into a time period where they turn 18 and they're not home and they want to register where they are living and going to school, there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand, me being a 17-year-old in America, why it's such an affront to a basic right.
Well, it goes back to my opening statement. We've been fighting over representation from day one, and we still are. There's no reason that young people shouldn't be automatically registered when they turn 18. There are other places that do that. We don't do that. Okay, that's a partial answer. But beyond that, and because we do get to decide if we want to participate or not. We don't have people coming around and saying, you, like they do in Australia, you must vote, because if you don't vote, we're going to give you a fine. Okay? And maybe we need to look at the Australian model a little more closely than we have. But
I think
if you decide you don't want to vote, that's your right as well. But when you want to vote and you find these ridiculous barriers placed in your way, that means there is something else going on here. And I think that becomes part of our discussion as well.
So how do you think, like looking at this now moment, as John Lewis would say, these 40 plus states who've enacted these so-called new voter rights or new voting laws, how do we strategize to circumvent the barriers that are now in place? And I look at Georgia as being a possible example of a modeling of that. You have Stacey Abrams, who did so well to organize the state in a way that gave access to people who were usually marginalized in the voting process. So now, what are those new strategies, given the fact that you've got all these new affronts in place? And like, I look at my own home county. I just got an email the other day about Souls to the Polls, which is the church organizing to get out the vote. Right. And the minister's note was, please participate in Souls to the Polls so they don't eradicate it. They don't get rid of it.
Well, and once again, when we're looking at different groups, we see different patterns based on historical patterns, but also more recent patterns. And so why would a state like Texas attack the ability of churches to have organizing around voter registration and actual voting? Well, because they're afraid of those who would actually participate and cast their ballot. So it becomes part of the politics of the moment, but it's also long-standing. And let me give you a couple quick examples. Following the Civil War, if you were poor and white, you could vote as long as your grandfather voted, and you didn't have to take any tests. But if you were recently freed and you were black, you couldn't vote because your granddaddy couldn't vote. We called that the grandfather clause. Now, it was eventually overturned by the Supreme Court some 30 years later, but that attitude remained, and it then morphed into the kind of actions you referenced in your intro to this session, when people had to literally decipher the Mississippi Constitution or the Alabama Constitution. And these are individuals who by law could not be taught to read or write, yet now they were being asked to interpret a constitution so that they could vote. And even if they got over that hurdle, then the state would say, oh, but now you have to pay a poll tax. Well, I don't have any money. Well, then I'm sorry, you can't participate. And it continued on until the first major breakthrough was a case in your state of North Carolina, Clarence, Smith versus Allwright, where the court said, hey, if you are setting up your voting process to say you must participate in the primary in order to participate in the general election, and then you say only whites can participate in that first primary, it meant that those who did not participate in that primary could not vote in the general election. And finally, the court said that is contrary to the 15th Amendment. But it then took from 1944 to 1965 to get the Voting Rights Act passed, and a very robust civil rights movement during that time. Okay? So this is of a piece. This is not new. What's new now is that we have other ways of voting. There are some localities and states experimenting with voting by computer as opposed to coming into a polling place. Absentee ballots have evolved over time. Early voting, or even same-day voting, was popular for a moment. Now it no longer is. But it's an example of how access to being able to participate in our political process has been fraught from the beginning and is still fraught today.
What about the notion, and this is going on not only in my home state of North Carolina, but I'm sure a whole lot others, but the gerrymandering and the redistricting, allowing certain folk to completely become marginalized yet again through that process. Is there like a movement to try to circumvent some of that right now?
Well, once again, when it comes to redistricting, that of all of the different remedies has always been problematic. We have never solved that. Why? Because the Supreme Court doesn't want to deal with it. And we're going back all the way to 63 to last year. The court still doesn't want to deal with it unless it's so egregious that they must do something. Okay? And so here we're about to have a redistricting process that follows our census. Every 10 years we do this, and the court, this current court, basically says we really don't want to deal with redistricting and make any additional changes. That's the current stance of this court. Okay? So that's it. It doesn't mean you can't organize around that fact, and I'm hopeful that the result of this redistricting process won't be as adverse as the experts first thought, but it's still a problem, and especially in swing states.
Speaking of swing states, and this is a bipartisan approach to this question.
and we must.
Thinly
That's
veiled,
important.
Thinly veiled. What are the seeming actions around the midterms politically? When I say politically, I'm speaking, what do you think the Republican angle will be to win back the House and the Senate? And what will the Democrats' approach be to maintain and to win?
Well, something I learned from one of your family members, Geraldine Boykin, who I have had the great honor to work with in states around the country, is that this is not a simple process. It never has been a simple process. And engaging in outreach and education and showing people why it's important, that is also part of this mix. But our pattern as a nation has been whoever wins the White House loses the next midterm. And that's that balance of power thing. Well, that party won. Let's not give them a whole bunch of, let's not give them all three branches. So let's go the other way. And that pattern will repeat itself this year again. Now, the only question is, how big a drop-off will Democrats suffer as compared to past midterms? And right now, most of the experts will tell you You have a motivated Republican base. You have a discouraged Democratic base because a number of the promises that were made in the last election have not yet come to fruition. And there's a special concern about young voters because they really showed out and showed up in 2020. And if they become further disillusioned, will they participate at all in 2022? So that's what we're looking forward to. That's part of our reality.
Before we open up the room for questions from the general body, can you just leave us with 3 tips that things you might be doing or paying attention to that might aid one way or the other in a fluid voting process for those in our communities who may or may not live in a liberal situation?
3, okay. I would start with the issue of voter ID to encourage anyone who's interested or thinks they want to vote to not wait until the last minute. And that's been our pattern as a nation. It's not just confined to folks who have been marginalized. People wait. But because of the changes in the law since the last election, that which was true in November 2020 is not necessarily true in November 2022. So people have to be encouraged to check their registration status. I had a conversation with my brother just today because in Pennsylvania, the deadline was today. I said, "Did you check your registration?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I guess I better do that." I said, "Yeah, you really should, because primaries are extremely important." So I'll start with that. The second thing we can look at is what happened in the Virginia gubernatorial midterm election last November. And what were the issues that motivated the Virginia governor's race? It had to do with race, but it wasn't couched as race. It was couched as, I don't want my child to feel badly in class, and so I don't like this critical race theory stuff, and he's going to protect our schools from that, so I'm going to vote for him, even if I have to cross party lines. So that was finding a cultural issue that superseded party identification. That's how I would explain it. When, and I say this seriously, critical race theory was not being taught in K through 12 schools.
No, I would laugh about that.
I'm just saying, I'm not saying that there weren't teachers that wanted to talk about it. I'm just saying that there was no formal policy on critical race theory in K through 12. And in fact,
as a curriculum.
Yeah. And on top of that, even in colleges, it's usually just in the law school.
Law school.
Okay, I'm just saying. I'm just
saying it makes certain GOP spokespeople look so ignorant when they jump up and say, CRT, critical race theory, that's what they're talking about. No, there's no such curriculum K through 12. It's so funny.
But if people believe it, Clarence, that's what counts. And so disinformation has become as potent a weapon as what the Klan did back in the day, the Ku Klux Klan. So I'm just making some observations that we can talk about further in terms of the risk. And then finally, I would say it's a question of messaging, that both parties have a chance to state their case, right? That's our process. But at the end of the day, if we have become a nation that says, if I don't like the election result, I'm just going to, cause another insurrection, then I would say our democracy is in graver danger than we had anticipated. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so we'll open up for the questions that Dr. Gills has.
Oh, I'm not on the chat for questions. That might have been someone else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Let's see.
I've got that. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and first I want to just thank you, Dr. Jarvis, for your insights. Let's start with Caitlin McGee, who has a question about how all of this relates to the movement to ban books. Caitlin, would you like to bring your question into this space?
Sure, thank you. I've learned so much. Thank you so much for being here with all your wisdom. I was wondering what actions are being taken that are not being talked about on the news, because there doesn't seem to be much action that's really being done against the banning of all the important books that states like Texas and Florida and in the Midwest and all over the South, because of racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia, and banning them are being done. And I was wondering if you knew what actions are being taken to prevent that.
Well, that's a great question, Caitlin. And let me say a couple things quickly. One is that this is not the first time we've had efforts to ban books, right? Before it was over issues of religion versus evolution, as one example. And when it's about identity and it's about power, then we have to look at why are certain books considered so dangerous that the only response is we must burn it so it can't be read. And I would go back to the example of what happened in Nazi Germany. What was one of their ways forward of indicating, hey, there's a new power structure going on here, and we're not going to simply burn books, we're going to burn institutions. We're going to make it difficult for this group that we have targeted, in that case, whether it was Jews or gypsies or homosexuals or anybody else they didn't like. But it was all about saying, this isn't about intellect. This is about passion and fear. And if we keep that in mind, we can start to push back. And I think we start with the librarians. We have to engage them in this discussion because they're the ones who can protect books and not allow them to be thrown on a fire in a fire pit, for example. And yet we're seeing that the ones that create discomfort are the ones that are being targeted, like Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye. I mean, here's a Pulitzer Prize winning book, but oh, I'm uncomfortable, so burn it. And I could, we could go down that list with a number of different books that are challenging, whether it's roles of gender or representation or identity or immigration status. It doesn't matter. It's about control and saying, we're uncomfortable and you've made us uncomfortable and this is our reaction. Now, in any case, it's still a question up to your representatives. Are they going to push back? Or are they going to sit on their hands? Or our courts? Are our courts going to say, well, I don't see a problem with burning books. And if you have people appointed to the bench who perhaps should not have been, then it becomes even more difficult to push back. So, very important issue. It's not going to go away, folks. And especially as those who are engaged in social justice and trying to make sure every group has equal access to benefits and liberties, we're going to see this kind of reaction because our country is that divided. That's my short answer.
And just to throw a little caveat there, I was just reading the other day that there's actually like an attempt to stop certain platforms that you could, portals that you can go and read books on. They're trying to stop even the access for certain books on those now. So
Yes.
even
Really?
knowledge is challenged. Yes.
Oh, no, no. This is serious stuff, folks. Anytime you're saying a book that was written in good faith is too dangerous, I'm not talking about books that are intended to incite violence against people and that kind of thing. I'm just talking about general literature and efforts to explain our world or explain our identities in that world. That's what's being attacked right now.
Thank you so much for that answer.
And I want to remind those who are interested in this topic, I think it's the final messy conversation of this spring is going to be devoted to the banning and increasingly calls for burning of books. Extraordinary. There's a couple other questions I'd like to get to.
Okay.
One is from Jody S. Carreño, who's asking a question about the role of education in the process of voting. Jody, would you like to bring your question into this space?
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was just bringing up that you were talking about primaries, and I canvassed in my area a few years ago, and I was so blown away. People were like, "Oh yeah, I'll go in November," and I was like, "Well, that's that's not how this works. You need to go. You need to go now and get your person to the November race there." And people were just like, no, I'll be there in November. I'll be there in November. I'm like, oh my gosh, it was crazy. The sheer number of people. And I live in I don't live in Seattle, but I live right outside of Seattle. So it was, kind of disheartening.
Yeah. Well, I guess the short answer I'd give to you about that is that we stopped teaching civics in our public schools. Okay. There was a lot of controversy over issues such as the Pledge of Allegiance and, what would happen if a student didn't stand up for it, right? This was the beginning, I would argue, the modern beginning of various culture wars. And so schools gradually just stopped teaching about government and rights and why the voting process is so key to all of that. And I would challenge anyone right now, show me places that are teaching those in junior high and high school about the voting process. And again, I'm still at that point of, if any person under 18 wants to vote but will be 18 by their birthday, on their 18th birthday will be before or on election day, I think they should be able to vote without any problem or controversy, but that's not our rule yet. And so how do we encourage public schools? I'm not talking about private schools, that's a different can of worms, but public schools to have a more robust civic education piece. And what would that look like? Can we talk to some major public school districts around the country and say, hey, this would be helpful to our democracy. Let's teach people how and why it's so important to engage in this process that we do annually in terms of determining who makes decisions in state legislatures and in Congress. That's my short answer, Jody.
I love that. Thank you so much. I mean, I think it just speaks to the less educated the populace is, certain sides can do better, So I don't think it behooves everyone to educate everyone equally.
Well, I remember when I was much younger and my parents were able to vote for the first time in 1965, and they took myself and my 4 siblings with them to the polls to say we could not do this until this law was passed. Now, that's not why I became a lawyer, but it made an impression on me that, wait a second, why did it take so long? That doesn't make sense. And yet we were being taught in school of how important the vote was, and yet we were still seeing all these limitations based on not just race, but also language and ability, right? If you aren't able to walk into a polling place, you should still be able to vote. And if English isn't your first language, you should still be able to vote if you are a citizen. And that was another provision in the Voting Rights Act to say, hey, if you've got 5% or more of this group, this language group, you must, states, give them their voter information in that language. Okay? That's still the law. So let's use it, is what I say, until the Supreme Court does something else I think is a little harebrained.
I too feel that it's one of the biggest losses we have in education, public education, is that we no longer teach young people how even a law is made, how a vote is carried out, what are the different, branches of government. They don't have a clue anymore. And I too, like you, I was carried to the poll. Every time my father went to vote, he made sure that I went with him. So I'm, was aware of that process.
And Asa, I appreciate your note about the Brooklyn Library offering e-cards to teens in states facing book bans. But get ready, someone's going to challenge that. You watch, because
Absolutely.
This is now part of this cultural malaise we're in the midst of.
I want to try to sneak in one more question, and this one happens to be from Asa, who I'm going to out as our librarian, just so you know who you're talking
to. That's what I had. So thank you for
protecting our books. Is he protecting our books?
I'm trying. Yeah, I was going to say thank you, but also I don't know if I should thank you. That's putting a lot on the back of the librarians, but I think it is something traditionally that's been a major part of, one of the few things in the profession that has really been a core value. And it is scary to see, some of these laws include prosecuting librarians.
Yes, they do. They do. They want to scare you. They want you to burn the book. Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess what I would say to that is, I am such a fangirl of librarians, and it's because I do research and they always help me. But one example I'll share with you is I was doing some work at the University of Washington library, and I was trying to piece together what Abraham Lincoln was doing when he first took office when it came to the issue of slavery. And I wasn't getting anywhere. And so, I reached out to one of the librarians there and I said, I need to do a deeper dive. Can you help me? And she did. And at the end of that process, I came away understanding that while Lincoln was very much anti-slavery, he was also willing to allow it to continue, but not at the cost of a civil war, if you will. And so he had instructed his Treasury Secretary to tell me how much money we have so we can buy up all of those who are currently enslaved and free them. But then it wasn't freedom for their own sake. It was freedom to then have them return to Africa. Okay? And if you had seen me that day in the library, you would have said, what's wrong with her? Because I'm like, wait a second, I know this. How do I not know this? And when I shared it later with a class at Rutgers, I had one student who was such a fan of Lincoln. He was like ready to take me down. I was like, whoa. I'm just sharing some facts with you. And I said, but you come back next week, and if you can show that I'm wrong, I'll apologize to you and the class. He came back the next week. He said, I did not know. I said, I didn't know either until a librarian showed me. So that class, I was able to convince them that it was important to make a librarian your friend. So
Okay,
that's my short answer.
Thank you.
Asa. So what's
Yeah.
your question, Asa?
Yeah, I did have this other question going back to the focus, and you did mention it at the end, but I was thinking about this, the reaction we saw to 2020, where a lot of the pushback is completely outside of the law.
Exactly.
And if you have about one major party that doesn't believe in the legitimacy of the election,
Yes.
it almost illegitimizes any voting rights laws or legislation or anything that. So I'm wondering if there's been a thought to kind of change the approach at all, or like why is it so important to stay focused on voting rights and law, and how can the law prevent that?
Wow.
Can it? Yeah.
Well, as I guess you have gathered, I'm not very sanguine about what the Supreme Court's going to do with its current makeup. But hope springs eternal. that's one answer. But more importantly, I think it's making sure people understand what is at risk if we don't pay attention to this and finally restore, at the very least, the Voting Rights Act. I'm not even talking about H.R. 1. That's going in a even broader direction of dealing with a whole number of key issues concerning governance and fairness and the voting process. But if we could at least restore Section 5 and undo the damage that the recent Arizona case did to Section 2, then we have a chance to do something. But it's not going to be easy because our nation is very, very divided. And before, there was at least one of the ways you deal with having your party defeated is saying, well, we'll get you next time. We're going to win next time, right? But if instead the strategy is, well, we're losing population and we're having fear of the other, and we're going to use those issues to keep our folks all riled up, that's not about unity. That's about division. And how can we then talk seriously about, hey, you get to vote for who you want to vote for, but I do too. And you should not be in a position to make it harder for people who look like me not to vote. And we've been doing that, as I said, since 1790.
So I'm going to step in to bring us formally to a close, as is our practice. We try to close around 5 o'clock. And then we continue on for another 15 minutes or so, if Dr. Jarvis is amenable to that.
I am.
In a more informal conversation, but this is your chance to express your gratitude to Dr. Jarvis for showing up and leading such a terrific conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. I appreciate that.
And just a reminder, next week, the Seattle BSU will be joining us at Messy Conversations. So return for a good conversation coming out of that context. And maybe to get us going in the more informal part, I don't have a well-formed question, but as you were talking, I was thinking about voting cynicism.
Yes.
And where it seems like you're there in your last remarks, and I'm thinking everything from gerrymandering, which we keep hearing is going to get better, and it only seems to get worse.
Right.
And then all these state challenges to voting rights, which we're seeing popping up, and very little pushback that I can see from the Democratic Party, maybe from the justice. And of course, all the money in politics, and then what nobody foresaw more than a few decades ago, the way in which technology, in the form of conspiracy and alternate realities, and all of that, all of that leads to a kind of voter cynicism. Like, what is the point at this point?
Right. Well, I think the only way to combat that fear and that anguish is with facts and research. And we have good research from 2016, and we're the election cycle of 2016, as well as 2020. It's starting to come out. The election lab at MIT has some great new information that's available. And a number of other groups. And I promised Clarence that I would share with him a longer list if we got into this area. And so I will make sure I do that. But at the heart of it, it's still this question of, why do some people feel that I have a right to vote, but you don't? And when that is then reflected in the legislature, when there are actions taken, like in the North Carolina case I referred to earlier, where the court said it was almost with surgical precision to change these lines in a way that would hurt Black voters. Why is that still part of our political life now? We're not talking 150 years ago. We're talking about a year ago or 3 years ago. That's one answer. The second is, technology, as with anything, can be very good or very bad. And when it comes to disinformation, it's very bad. And if it is then spurred by people who want other foreign actors to interfere in US elections, which I believe happened in 2016, then you have these adverse reactions. And then people say, well, why should I even bother? The whole thing is rigged. Well, it isn't rigged unless we allow it to stay rigged. And I would say that from a public policy standpoint, but more importantly, from a voter perspective, we have to put the information out there that's reliable and not based on fake news. That's where I would start. And who would be the people willing to say, hey, I don't care who you vote for, just allow everybody to vote? That's the start of the kind of outreach I think we need to engage in, starting with our young people, especially those who haven't been part of the process. But there's also the folks who are weary. In the Black community alone, there's been especially since 2016, this creeping fear of, why are we always being attacked? Well, what I told you earlier, this is not new. And it's not going to go away overnight without concerted action, not just among Black voters, but among all voters who are willing to say, you have a right to vote and I have a right to vote. Let's have the best candidate win. Boom. But if that's not our pattern anymore, then we're in even deeper trouble than I thought.
It's also very interesting about the purging of the voter rolls, which is a real big issue. I did not know it was a real thing until I was actually in North Carolina. And one of my cousins, who's a former sheriff, he was actually manning the campaign office for Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. And he got calls about several people getting letters about, being purged from the rolls. And I said, well, why don't you contact the registrar, and find out, why this is and why this is happening, and get some kind of verification process going on. And he was so busy trying to follow the rules that he just kind of let it go. But, in my own research, I realized that in between 2006 and 2008, there were over 4,000 voters purged, but by 2016, there were over 16 million voters purged from the rolls, and this continued.
Yeah. Well, on purges, I really have a problem with purging. Okay. If you couldn't tell, I mean, you've shown that you are qualified to vote. Why does it matter? And why should someone be watching to say, "Oh, you haven't shown up in a while"? As long as you have your ID, and I'm not a fan of voter ID either, other than initially to show that you are eligible. In fact, I've got a book coming out later this year on voter ID, written with two of my colleagues at Baruch, Don Weissenen and Nicole Gordon. And we did a study of the 10 states that had the most restrictive voter ID laws. And even in those states, average people said, I don't mind showing ID, but I don't have an ID. So what do I do? Um, how can we make that easier for me to get my ID if I don't have it? In this case, we were talking about some rural states where people were actually born at home, not in a hospital. So it was harder for them to have that kind of proof. But it still comes down to we don't have to make it more difficult. If you get on the rolls and you are eligible and have not otherwise lost your right to vote, which again is an artifact of the Civil War through the 13th Amendment, where we said, hey, if you're convicted of a crime, we can prevent you from voting. Why? Again, if you're out of jail and you're back into the community, why are you still carrying this burden? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm starting to rant.
No.
I try not to. But and in Florida, oh wait, we had a referendum. The reason we had to have a referendum is because there was a Supreme Court case that was standing in the way, and the people voted 66% to allow felons to vote. But then the state Senate turned it around and said, no, we're still not going to let you do it unless you've paid back every cent to the state that you may still owe the state because of what? Some unpaid fine that you didn't know about? I'm just saying. The point is that people can make it difficult when it doesn't have to be. And we thought for a moment that with the help of America Vote Act and a few other legislative actions that we were making progress, like through the National Voter Registration Act. That was a big deal, a big deal. It's still the law, folks, but no one's talking about it. And it's the kind of thing we have to remind folks that by law, if you are otherwise in contact with your state, they're supposed to also afford you the opportunity to register to vote as part of that transaction. So, let's get some folks after these states and say you can't, sit on your hands when someone's in there otherwise getting benefits or signing up for them. You're supposed to also allow them to register to vote as part of that transaction. And we have not done what we need to do on that. Michael?
Yeah, I like your idea about the if once you turn 18, you be able to vote. It reminded me of when I turned 18, I received in the mail a selective service card.
Yes, you
did. They weren't even drafting them. You know what I mean? That was long banded. But yet they selectively drafted me into the services. Why not do that for voting? You know what I mean? And, as a formerly incarcerated person currently on probation, supposedly in the state of Washington now, I have the ability to vote. But
it's important.
You know what I mean? It's a trip because I can't wait. I can't wait to register. I got to figure out how do I go exactly through that process. I did register vote when I was 18 years old, though I didn't. I voted one time. Okay. I was proud of it. Then I caught a conviction.
Well, there you go.
In that same year. But I would say, though, it is so cool, though, to have the right to vote, especially when, they count bodies in areas, in districts where there's prisons. And, in the state of Washington, a lot of the prisons are in Eastern Washington.
Yes, they are.
Supposedly, this state is heavily controlled by Democrats. It's a blue state, they say.
Right. But so what's going on? What's going on?
That's what it would be in the interest of but the blue state Democrats have passed that law to make it to where if you're on probation, you can vote. But I really did. I came in 25 minutes late. I wish I was on time, but I love politics. I hope to one day be able to attend this school. I'm at PCC, Pierce Community College now, studying criminal justice, but I hope to eventually transfer to the social justice program.
Wonderful.
With a record and the stigma that comes with it. And I don't really see myself being a lawyer in this liberal state, but I maybe become a paralegal. And I
don't give up. Don't give up.
Do that warehouse work.
Well, let me say this to you, Michael, and I mean this seriously. It doesn't have to be this way. We have a state, it's called Vermont, and even if you're in jail, you get to vote. I don't see any revolution going on in Vermont, do you? I mean, it hasn't created some major problem. So why is it that we are still holding on to a slave era thing that came out of the way we handled the 13th Amendment? Well, we're going to let you out of slavery, but you know, if you were engaged in a crime, well, we can keep you and we can stop you from voting forever. I mean, that's just not, well, I just think it's time for us to make a change and get rid of those old processes while we're also fighting the new ones. That's what I would say. So, Michael, hey, if you want to go to law school, go to law school. Okay, that's what I'll say. Because there are no, I'm not. I can't say what I was about to say. I'll stop right there because I can't disparage my group during Law Day week. Can't do that.
All right. I want to be conscious of your time, Dr. Jarvis. I want to thank everybody who participated. Thank Clarence for doing such an extraordinary job and for bringing you to us as well. Happy Law Day to you.
Thank you so much, David. This has been absolutely my pleasure. And I'll make sure Clarence knows when our book has finally dropped. Because, see, it was supposed to be out right after the 2020 election. But what happened? The election didn't end. And then they were like, okay, you got to do some updates on all those cases. And, of course, my part of the book were all the cases. I was like, oh, joy. So that's why it's going to be a little later than it otherwise was.
Well, maybe you could join us then. Come back.
Yeah. I'd love to. Thank you,
with
Dr.
your colleagues. That'd be great.
I would love to. I would love to. And thank you for such a warm welcome. My heart has always, a piece of my heart was left in California after I went to Stanford. And some of my best friends from there live in Seattle, so I'm always up there seeing them. And then I worked in LA, so what else can I tell you? Hello, Antioch. Thank you for having me.
Great having you.
Thank you very, very much. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.